My name is Ross Wilson and I am a fellow in English at Emmanuel. I'm going to talk briefly about my research, which focuses chiefly on the poetry of the 19th century, especially Romantic poetry, and on the history, theory and practice of literary criticism from about 1750. My last book, which was published by Cambridge University Press in 2013, was on the poetry of Percy Shelley, the Romantic poet Percy Shelley. And in that work, I take as a leitmotif for an interpretation of Shelley's work his statement that we live on, and in living we lose the apprehension of life. And what I was particularly interested in was the distinction that Shelley seems to be drawing there between merely living on, so life as mere survival of going on relatively aimlessly, and what he calls, perhaps rather nomically, the apprehension of life, which seems for him to be a more emphatic, more indeed animate sense of living. And I argue that Shelley thinks of his poetry chiefly as, in some ways, capable of instilling apprehension and therefore of instilling animacy, of instilling life in its readers. He thinks, I want to argue, that his poems themselves are in some respect living beings, and thus, because they are such, also capable of instilling life. Now, since publishing that book, I've continued to work on Shelley, so I've written, for example, on Shelley's translation of Plato's Symposium, but more recently I've come to focus on Shelley's great friend and rival, Lord Byron, and have written a couple of pieces comparing both Shelley and Byron. The first of these thinks about Shelley and Byron's adoption of the Italian verse form ottava rima, which Byron takes from a range of Italian satirical poets and develops for his own purposes in, above all, his poems 𝘤𝘮𝘯𝘯 and The Vision of Judgment, and above all, I think, Don Juan, to great comic effect. And I compare and in some senses contrast Shelley and Byron's usage of this term. So Shelley uses it in two poems, Hymn to Mercury, which is ostensibly a translation of a Homeric poem, and his poem The Witch of Atlas. The second piece is also a comparison between Shelley and Byron and focuses on their use of the Bible. Now, for those of you who know anything about these two poets, this might seem like a rather surprising topic. Shelley was expelled from Oxford University for writing a pamphlet called The Necessity of Atheism, and Byron, well, is hardly famous for his orthodoxy and reverence. Nevertheless, what I want to argue in this piece is that the conception of poetry in the Hebrew Bible in particular, but also in the New Testament, is very important to Byron and Shelley's conception of what poetry can achieve. And of course, there is a wide range of allusion and indeed direct reference to the Bible in both of their oeuvres. However, my main project at the moment is in the field of literary criticism, its history, theory and practice, and I am writing a book about the genres in which literary criticism has been written since about 1750. Now that date is important because a lot of the histories of literary criticism offer a kind of outline narrative that says before 1750, literary criticism was practiced in lots of different forms, in lots of different genres. But after 1750 it settles down really into the essay form and more extendedly into the treatise that then becomes the modern monograph. There's some truth to that argument, certainly, but I want to argue that it's also the case that after 1750 there has actually been quite a rich ecology of literary critical writing in generic terms. One might think here of the dialogue form in which Clara Reeve's seminal consideration of the novel form was written in the middle of the 18th century. One might think of the importance of biography from writers like Samuel Johnson, who was also, of course, the subject of a great biography by James Boswell, through to Elizabeth Gaskell. The preface is a crucial genre in which literary criticism is written in this period, from Wordsworth's great preface to the lyrical ballads, to Henry James's sometimes apologetic but very intricately argued and biographically informative prefaces to his New York edition to his edition of his novels. So in this book I work through different genres of literary critical writing, arguing that a proper consideration of the generic status of literary criticism is crucial to thinking about its main claims and tendencies. This project is close to culmination, at least I hope so, and so I've been thinking a little bit about what I might work on next. And I'm going to focus next upon balance. Balance both as a concept within moral and political philosophy, but balance also as a feature of literary work. I've written on this a little bit already in a consideration of Robert Browning's poem 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘯𝘦𝘤𝘵 and the Book, and also in William Hazlitt's reading of the political philosophy and indeed rhetorical strategies of Edmund Burke. This project, perhaps inevitably, has the working title of On Balance, and I look forward to doing further work on it shortly. I hope that gives you an idea of what my work is on. Many thanks indeed for listening.